Well, good afternoon, members. And before I open the meeting, can I welcome the students from Beckett University? I'm sure they're going to learn a lot from you guys this afternoon. But if they do spot something that I'm unaware of, please feel free to tell me afterwards. I always say that to students. If you see anything I've missed, please let me know about it. We're always seeking to improve our decision making, but you're very welcome. Moving on to the agenda then. I'm Councillor Jim McKenna and I will be chairing today's meeting. City Plans Panel deal with applications from the city centre as well as the largest and most significant applications the council receive. The aim of the panel is to hear all relevant information from applicants, members of the public and council officers to help members of the panel make their decision. Could I now invite members and officers to introduce themselves and mute your microphone once you have done so? Can I start with you, Daljit, please?
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Daljit Singh. I lead the City Centre Planning Team.
Matthew Walker, City Centre Planning Team.
Good afternoon, Lisa Brannan, Principal Engineer, Highways.
Good afternoon, Councillor Caroline Gruen. I represent Bramley and Stanningley.
Good afternoon, Councillor Katie Dye from Killenbeck and Seacroft Ward.
Good afternoon, Councillor Kaylee Brooks, Little London and Woodhouse.
Good afternoon, Councillor Annie Maloney, Beaton and Holbeck Ward.
Good afternoon, Councillor Peter Carlill, Carley and Farsley Ward.
Good afternoon, Lewis Foote. I'm part of the Plans Panel Admin Team.
Good afternoon, everybody. Councillor Dan Cohn from the Audley Ward.
Good afternoon. I'm Councillor Colin Campbell.
Good afternoon, Councillor David Blackburn, Farnley and Wortley Ward.
Good afternoon, Councillor Barry Anderson, Adland Wharfdale Ward.
Good afternoon, Stephen Worley, Design Officer.
Good afternoon, Andy Booth, Clerk to the panel.
Hey, good afternoon, Amy Davis, Legal Officer.
Good afternoon, David Feeney, Chief Planning Officer.
Good afternoon, Jonathan Carr, Head of Development Management.
Thank you for all. Moving on to the agenda, can I ask Andy to introduce item 1 to 5, please?
Thank you, Chair. Under agenda item number 1, there are no appeals against the refusal of inspection of documents. Under item number 2, there's no exempt information on today's agenda. Under item number 3, there are no late items of business. Moving on to agenda item number 4, could I ask members if they have any interest to declare? Councillor Anderson.
Member Kirkgate Market Board.
I'm also a member of the Market Board.
Right, thank you. Moving on to agenda item number 5, with no apologies for absence today, Chair.
Thank you, Andy. Moving on then to item 6, which starts on page 7. Minutes of the meeting held on the 2nd of November. 2 meetings in 1 November. Busy month for us, but we don't have to have Christmas meeting. I'll go through my usual way then, if you don't mind, starting at page 7. Page 8. And finally, page 9. Is there any matters arising? No? Can I ask then for your approval, please? Well,
yeah,
Councillor Cohn, please. I know. I was only an officer nudged me. I thought you were putting up for approval, to be honest. Anyway, moving on. Can we now go to
No, I did that.
No, children, behave yourself. Okay, can we move on then to agenda item 7 on page 11? Matthew, can you introduce this, please?
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, everybody. Members will recall back in July, you were presented with a pre-application proposal for a new building on the Soyo development at Quarry Hill to replace the previous proposed multi-storey car park, and it's for a 360-bed student accommodation block. Members requested that this come back for determination following a healthy debate around a number of items. So to start off with a quick introduction to the site, Soyo Block A would occupy the northeastern quadrant of the wider Soyo site. You see Quarry House on the right-hand side of the plan there. Completed blocks E and F to the left-hand side of the red line boundary. Blocks B and C, which are nearing completion, to the south, and the future siting of Block D to the southwest. Block D is imminently about to receive its planning permission following the agreement for a delegated decision from members last year. This slide shows the overall future composition of the Soyo site, more or less as the birds would see it. You can just see noted there, that's Block A. So it's on the left-hand side of the central boulevard that runs towards Quarry House. And here we can see the proposed approach to site composition, with Block A basically hosted in the same format as the previously proposed car park, producing a symmetrical effect along the central boulevard and in parallel massing to help define that central street that runs from the Playhouse Square up towards Quarry House. This slide zooms in a little bit further to the precise siting of the building. The top image in effect shows us where Block A would slide in between Blocks E and F and Quarry House. And the view from the view here is from the adjacent footbridge over the A64, which takes you to Mabgate. This part of the wider Soyo site has now for some time been the building compound for the construction of blocks B and C. It's been a bit of a dead area. Obviously, these proposals would activate this last sort of quadrant of the site. And here we've got the proposed site plan in context with the as-built and consented buildings round and about. Now, at this point, I just want to take a moment on the issue of resident safety, because that's something that rightly came up in the previous discussions at this site. This plan clearly shows the relationship to the northern and eastern elevation of windows of Block E, which overlook the development and its surrounding pathways. And there's also just dotted in on site there the approved St Cecilia Street development, which would overlook the northern elevation of the building when it's finally built out. And the adjacent roadways around here, as you can see at the top of the plan and to the side, they would be built to adoptable standards, so they would be in receipt of standard street lighting offer that the city has. In conjunction with West Yorkshire Police, we've advised what the expectations for building native lighting and CCTV would be around the building. There'd be 24/7, 365-day site management of the premises. And this also links to that already provided at Blocks E and F next door, and that which will be provided at Blocks B and C, which are imminently about to finish. The precise detail of all this will be controlled by conditions, but I just thought I'd take the opportunity to mention that at this point, given that you're getting a holistic view of what the building looks like and where it sits, etc., in relation to the other buildings. So, like the other buildings, both built out and emerging on Soyo, the building is proposed to take an inverted C-shaped form, with the habitable spaces coalescing around a courtyard area, which will be utilised as publicly accessible amenity space throughout the day. Like the other faces at Soyo, controls will be included through the legal agreement to allow this area to be used during the day by the public, but then secured away from public use at night time to give the residents privacy. To the left of the plan, in the red square, as you can see here, you can see the sorry, I've lost my spot here. You can see the proposed car parking. Now, members were at the pre-app asked us to look again at the amount of turning availability and pick up and drop off provision. That's now been revised to increase that area in accordance with Highways advice and members' wishes. Two of the car parking spaces that were previously proposed in there, to sort of give a little bit more breathing space, we've relocated those to the northern edge of the building, so that should increase the footfall around that northern side of the building as you go towards the footbridge there. All of these spaces will be disabled standard, so the larger spaces, they'll be made available for public use, most notably the Playhouse, and also there'll be electrical vehicle charging points put in. We've done quite a lot of work with the applicant to make sure that the footways around this area are going to be wide enough, particularly for wheelchair users, But yeah, the developer has taken on board the comments that were made in July by members about that particular point. There's a cycle store shown in the orange rectangle, and again, in line with the Highways comments and members' comments, the developer has now fully detailed that there will be charging facilities in there for electrical bikes. We're going to control the finer details of that through the planning conditions, just to make sure that's delivered appropriately. But again, this is a point that was raised by members, so we thought we'd report back to you very clearly that that's been looked at. And quickly just take you through the elevations. The materials are a combination of aluminium panelling, predominantly to the eastern face of the building, and then a combination of panelling and brickwork to the remaining elevations. The developer team have, again, at the request of members, particularly Councillor Khan, brought this point up that it will be necessary to bring samples. So they brought a sample board for you at the back of the room for you to take a look once I finish whittering on. This slide shows the shorter elevations to the northern and southern edges of the building. And as was raised by the design officer, the key importance with this sort of postmodern approach and quite sort of logical and rhythmical elevations is that there needs to be a sense of depth and perception to windows. So we've attracted that detail from the developer now rather than at the conditions stage. We're getting a good deep reveal on all windows and fenestration openings. And then this slide briefly just gives you sort of an isometric view of the building form and how the palette of materials all knit together. We can see how the materials break up the elevations and sort of reduce that monosymbolism through the traditional base, middle and top approach to design, which has been the approach across the estate. How they use horizontal coursing to break up the massing in the more planar areas of elevation, and they're going to be using projecting brickwork again as an area to break up sort of lengthier, undetailed areas of massing on the building. So it's been well, in our opinion, it's been well considered and is in keeping sort of with the general palette across Soho. And then this gives you just an site-wide impression of where the building sits. It's a 13-metre gap between blocks F and the new block. It's 18 metres to Quarry House and 15 metres to blocks B and C. So contextually, it sits with the same sort of spatial characteristics as the remainder of the Soho estate. And again, that's just another site-wide section, just so you can see how that fits together. And then just coming back to that materials palette, the next slide showed the proposed approach to materials and how they will relate to the existing family of materials. So you just see a few examples of what's gone on elsewhere at Soho and how it's in keeping, not identical, obviously. We're looking for slight variations in tone, slight variations in detailing, but it sits as part of that family of buildings that's either emerging or already present on the site. That's just another example of the projecting brickwork, and just at the bottom of the slide there, you can see an impression of what we believe what we're going to be looking for in terms of the quality of the landscaped area that sits within the courtyarded area. And this is just a pictorial example of the samples that are going to be made available for you to take a look at. And again, just some more precedent images of what's gone on round and about Soho. There's varying depths of window reveal there, etc., and various different tones of the aluminium cladding that are going to be used. So again, a variation on the theme, but we're not looking for things to be identical. Just for example, the building you can see there at the top left, the top right, doesn't have the same depth of reveal as we're looking at here, but when you see that as part of a variation of different depths across the estate, we think that's how you get that variety across the estate, and you sort of reduce everything looking more or less the same and identical and boring. So just typical floor plans, as you'd expect. The plan on the left there is the ground floor plan, and the sort of central amenity area and the internal amenity spaces all coalescing around that sort of external terrace area that's going to be available for both the public and residents. And then the back of house stuff shifts towards the Quarry House elevation, sits at the back of the site there, and that's more or less the service and delivery area that's going to be laid by the top right of that plan as you see it. And then it's an identical floor plate moving up the building. And what we sought to do with the developer is to try and mix studios and clusters together. So you're not getting a particular demographic of student or a particular type of tenure at one floor. Everything's pepper potted through the sites, through the building rather. So you get that sort of mixture of different people. You know, people who have a studio, for example, they can mingle and cohabit with people who have clusters, etc., and share their amenity spaces. You know, if they become friends, they don't feel like they're being hived off into one particular part of the building. This just gives you an example of the split. Obviously, in policy terms, we look to try and get a split between clusters and studios and accessible units. And we've got 37% clusters, and it's a studio-led scheme. It's 63% studios. We've got the in terms of private amenity space. So sorry, communal amenity space for the residents. They're coming in at double what RSPD requires, and obviously there's the external amenity area on top of that. Just to give you some example of the layouts of rooms, obviously we take a great deal of care to make sure that everything that you need for a student life is available. So there's enough space for a chair, enough space for a desk. You're not having to sit on the bed. There's appropriate space for cooking facilities and such like with respect to the studios. And there's a little bit of wriggle room in terms of the room sizes here. They're coming in well in excess of what RSPD requires. So in terms of amenity, we think it's a good scheme in that regard. And then there are a number of accessible studios, and not only are they coming in with the required accessible studios that the policy requires in terms of the British Standard and building regulations, but there are a number of the rooms are going to actually be future adaptable as well. So they're oversized, and if there's a demand-led system there, if there is a greater need for more accessible studios, some of which are large enough to have a hoist installed as well. So we're not setting out at day one to say you must have X amount of rooms. What we're saying is there's got to be the capacity in there to adapt to the demand. And then I wanted to touch briefly on this because there were a number of points. Members, specifically Councillor Campbell, Councillor Gruen and Councillor Dye in July gave quite a lot of detailed feedback about landscaping. To summarise, the scheme for Block A follows the approach taken with other phases approved as part of the outline consent. And on this basis, I think we need to have regard to how the landscaping works holistically across SOYO. I mean, SOYO's come forward to you members as a series of small chunks. And I don't think at any point we've actually sort of looked at how it all knits together. So I thought I'd just take the opportunity to show you this plan. Now, the first thing to bear in mind here is, if you take a look at the top right hand of the plan there, that's the footprint of what would have been the multi-storey car park. So there was no landscaping coming along within the footprint of a car park. What this scheme therefore provides, if you look at the bottom right, is there's a net gain in terms of what we were actually envisaging in terms of soft landscaping across SOYO as a whole. Admittedly, it's got to be in proportion with the amount of residents that we have, etc. And that's what this scheme does. But in the first instance, if there was a car park there, we wouldn't be getting anything like what the scheme will provide. So I think that's important to raise at this point. The other thing I wanted to make mention of is that there was, members were quite right, try and maximise the amount of green space. We've got to strike a balance, I think, here with pedestrian permeability, the ability for people to move through the site and cycles, wheelchairs, etc. And there isn't a great deal of space in the public realm for wide expanses of landscaping, lawns, etc. What we have worked with the developer, particularly around the sort of southern edge of this building, is to have fewer instances, but larger instances of landscaping that can take larger species of planting and trees, which is obviously better for carbon capture. But we are working within quite a constrained area. And the other thing to bear in mind, and this was raised in July by members, is that things felt very harsh and hard on site. Well, that's because what you've been basically looking at is an interim landscaping treatment across the central boulevard and not a completed scheme. The hoardings are coming down now on blocks B and C, which themselves have integrated landscaping within their courtyard areas as well. And the other thing to mention is between blocks C and D, and this comes along with block D, which again I mentioned is about to receive its permission, is there is a tiered large-scale landscaping area that's going to be made available as well. So I just wanted to make mention of that we're not just looking at this building in site, but in its own right, but as a component of the wider site, the existing amenity areas and green space that there is already open between blocks E and F, the stuff that's about to come on stream within B and C, and then the stuff that comes along with Block D as well. The developer's intention is to develop this building and Block D contemporaneously. Obvious reasons, build cost, economies of scale and such like. So by the time this use comes into order, everything should then be on site in terms of the whole comprehensive piece of landscaping across the site. So I just thought I'd touch on that. And then this slide just gives you an example, just to remind members of the sort of existing landscape typology across SOYO, just to give you some examples. You can see the hard landscaping there is really high quality, and the two images at the bottom on the right hand side, that's the areas between blocks E and F. So those areas are already open and available to residents to use. And then just to touch on wind as well, it was noted, I recall from the pre-app presentation, that members were quite concerned about how gusty it was on site. One thing to make mention that this building and Block D effectively provide the last two pieces of enclosure for the central boulevard. Wind conditions are deemed safe. It's all been tested through the application process. We always undertake that work when dealing with buildings of this sort of scale in accordance with our microclimate toolkit that we have in draft. And in order to sort of improve comfort on the site, I do stress comfort rather than safety, because once these two buildings go into place, it is then safe in terms of wind speeds. There are a number of integrated features in the landscaping scheme, mainly involving screens and planters, which sit within the landscaping scheme, which effectively sort of drop that wind speed across the central streets and make things feel a hell of a lot more comfortable than what you witnessed when you went on the site visit back in July. And then just finally, there's just a couple of slides here. This is just you've seen these images before. There's no substantial changes to the design of the building since what came forward in July. Here it is sitting as you look, Quarry House on the right hand side. So as you can see, we've gone for the larger scale areas of landscaping with the seating that are capable of taking at least some decent sized trees. And then finally, that's the landscaped area between the block. And you can see that symmetry just in the backdrop there with Block B, which is literally about to open any time in the next few weeks. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Matthew. I understand there's some material samples at the back. So shall we go and have a look at it at this stage? And then we'll resume as quickly as possible. Sorry?
Just pause the recording, or are we all right?
Pause it. I've locked myself. Oh yeah. I think this has got rogue. There are no speakers against. So the applicants are here. Should you have any questions, I will invite them forward to answer those questions. In the meantime, can I invite members to ask question of the case officer? Matthew, please. Peter.
Thanks, Chair. A couple of questions. One was just around the points of safety. I see the measures that are included in terms of safety, but one of the things I think myself and other members were particularly concerned about was the entrance to the cycle store, which is round the back, so past the back door of the kiosk, as it's known, and then in what is quite a darkened corner there. Was there any attempt to look at moving that or other measures there? Because I see that would only really be overlooked from the office building at the back, that would obviously not have much in the evening, and it just seems a somewhat unsafe location behind the bins at the back of a commercial unit. And so that's question one. The second one was just, I note the comments about Active Travel England in this one, and it references obviously in the recommendation that we'd look at what comments they made. A more general question, really, in terms of the comments they made, I haven't really seen them referred to as much yet. The quantification that they ask for on cycle movements and some of the areas wide around the site, is that something that we'll take more account of then in terms of future applications? Because obviously they're a statutory consultee now, and I imagine we should be asking the questions that they're asking us there.
Sorry. So in terms of Active Travel England and the and sort of cycle movements, etc., we have actually agreed a contribution from this development towards cycle improvements for the route, which is called the Eastern Gateway, which is a link up through Templar Street towards the universities. So they are providing a contribution towards those cycle improvements. So we have, and that is based on the assessed sort of cycle trip generation from the development. Hope that answers part of your question. We are now taking on board, obviously, Active Travel England comments. Some of their comments are quite broad brush, and then we dig down into the detail.
Lisa, Matthew.
Yeah. On the location of the cycle store, we did look at that, but it was really a face-off between where the refuse collection was going to be undertaken from, and that. So what we did is we worked closely with West Yorkshire Police to get an exact specification and location for where we want CCTV and lighting to be in that location, and what the legibility is. Otherwise, we'd have to be facing that off towards the northern end of the site, and as you can appreciate, there's even less visibility around that area there. So it's not ideal, but it is, we think, the best that we can accommodate in that in this particular case. It's not a perfect development, but we have at least gone to some great lengths with West Yorkshire Police to get exact specifications of the video camera equipment that's going to need to be required, and the exact luminance levels of lighting and positioning of this at this early stage, which is normally just an item that we send out. We have a discussion around it, and then we leave it to conditions. We've got buy-in from everybody concerned on that particular point, very early doors. Access controls being another one as well. So no, it's not ideal, but it's what we think the best we can achieve in this particular case.
Thank you, Matthew. Councillor Carl, please.
Thank you, Chair. Can I also take this opportunity to thank the officers and the developers for bringing the samples for this afternoon to have a look at it. That's one. And the other question is on the safety and security for me. On page 15, top page, it says there was going to be a consultation with police regarding safety and security on the blocks for young people. Has that been taking place?
Yeah, so we've done some work with Lisa Reardon of West Yorkshire Police, not only taking into account this particular block, but actually where it sits as part of the overall composition of the site. There is always the danger with these things that they're looked at in isolation and not sort of looked as part of the patchwork quilt of developments that work round and about. Now, first of all, this is seen as an improvement for the area in terms of footfall. The likelihood is that that route over to Mabgate and St Mary Street is likely going to be a much more heavily trafficked pedestrian route, and it's going to help activate Mabgate in that particular area. So there are upstream benefits in terms of the safety of the general area by having increased footfall. In terms of the actual residents in this particular block, we really have got drilled down to the nth degree in terms of access control, the level of lighting, the resolution and British standard. Well, everything's going to have to be in accordance with British standards in terms of recording, off-site recording, and all of this has been put through to the developer who's agreed to all of this. We've got guarantees around there being 24/7, 365-day site concierge, which is the approach that's been taken for Block C and F and B and C as well. So it's just about recognising really that it has been looked at. It's been looked at in far more detail at this early stage than used to be the case. And there is a condition in there that requires full details of this. And as I've mentioned with reference to other developments as well, we're looking at this as part of the landscaping condition rather than it just being a standalone thing, which I know sounds like a bit of a strange thing, but if you think about how you build a site and where your vantage points are and where lines of sight are, etc., where you put street lighting in relation to large scale landscaping features, those two things should be looked at together. So it's the same approach we've taken with Lisbon Street, with Yorkshire Post, and it's what we're doing here as well. And the police have signed up to that too. So they've gone into an awful lot of detail with us and the developer at this really early stage on this. I hope that gives you some reassurance. That's really all I can say at the moment. The finer detail of it will be secured through the conditions, but in terms of desire lines, pedestrian routes, etc. And the other thing fundamentally, I think I'll just mention at this point as well, this was going to be a car park with no visibility from it. So we're actually doubling the amount of natural surveillance in this particular part of the site compared to, let's say, somebody just walking through the site to get to their car on an evening. So there's an awful lot of facing room windows going to be facing this area. So it just will activate this particular part of the city.
Matthew? Councillor Campbell, please.
You've already touched on our comments last time in relation to green space. I'm assuming that the developer is buying out some element of green space. So do we have a figure for how much they're going to contribute? Or maybe they're not buying out.
No, the policy for the city centre has a hectare threshold on it before they're actually liable to provide any green space on site in terms of an off-site contribution. So they sit underneath that. So as a consequence, what we have is what we have in terms of the green space. There's no off-site contribution associated with this. It's under half a hectare in size. So based on the current policy, there isn't an ask in terms of green space contribution.
I don't see any further hands. Can we go on to comments, please? Comments from members? No comments. Can I ask if any member is prepared to move it? Councillor Cohen and Councillor Gruen. All those in favour, please show. Colin, are you abstaining? It's myself off. Okay, do you want to sum up, Dalji, please, if needed?
Yes, members. No, I'm not in shock. Members are clearly in support of the proposals. The majority have agreed the officer's recommendation, apart from one abstention. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Dalji. Is Robin about? Oh, he's here. Thanks, Matthew. members will know this was subject to a very interesting site visit this morning where we learnt an awful lot on site. And thank you for guiding us around the development.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, my name's Robin Coghlan. I'm a principal planning officer in the central team. So this is a scheme for a block of 38 dwellings and a small ground floor office. So I'll just from the slides, you can see the site. It's on the northern side of Cross Green Lane, just along from the junction with Easy Road. And just to the south is the A61 East Street. It's a residential development in a regeneration area on the fringe of the city centre, and it's supported in principle by policy EB4. That's the East Street Opportunity Area of the Aire Valley Leeds Area Action Plan. So the next slides just give you a flavour of the area. So these slides show the existing buildings on the site. There's 2 business buildings you can see there, and residential buildings, generally old, neglected, unexceptional, low rise. This shows number 43 Cross Green Lane, which adjoins the site immediately to the east. It's divided into 3 self-contained flats. And in my report, I've thoroughly examined the light, enclosure and privacy impact. Here you can see really the only window of significance that faces directly towards the development. Does this have a pointer on it? Is it the
red one?
Oh yeah, so there's the window there, because that faces towards the development. So I've had a pretty thorough look at the impact of the development and feel that the impact is acceptable. Most of the other windows, like up there, and there's also ones on the other side of the courtyard, would only really have an acute view of the new development. So here you can see the commercial uses on the corner of Easy Road. There's a cafe and a pizza outlet, hair and beauty salons. And you can also see that's 43 Cross Green Lane. You can see that the flats, many of the flats have other windows with a fairly generous sort of outlook. And the Cross Green Lane trading estate is to the rear of the development. The owner and several of the occupiers have objected on the grounds of layout, density of buildings, noise and disturbance, overshadowing an outlook, overlooking privacy, scale, design, materials, and visual appearance. But we kind of feel really that there isn't much of an issue there because it's not residential. Most of the buildings don't have windows, and we expect that it would be able to continue functioning just the same as it is now with the development. Although there obviously would be some overshadowing, but really only to the car parking areas. And the next 2 slides really show you that it's an area in transition. So this slide you can see to the rear, there's a lot of suburban housing. It's generally quite low rise, really. There's houses along Spring Close Avenue behind the trading estate. But then when we go to the next slide, looking towards the city centre, you can see the two echo schemes, and you can see generally that this is a site right on the margins, really, of where the city centre is beginning to spread out. And so this is the actual proposal. Yeah, I've got two slides here. That's the front elevation looking onto Cross Green Lane, and that's the rear elevation in reverse. Essentially, the ground floor at the right-hand end, the eastern end, is the office. There's car parking along the rest of the ground floor and other servicing. And then floors 1 to 6 are residential. They all meet the housing policies, the standards that are set by the council. And then at the 7th floor, just up there really, there's a walled garden. And the walled garden is really the only part of the that's accessible to the residents. And you can maybe see that a bit more on this slide. You can see that there's quite a lot of green roofs. Oh, sorry, I pressed the wrong button there. Let's go back. So all of these are green roofs. They're at different levels, and they won't be accessible to residents, but they will have a sort of substrate and appropriate vegetation that will be an enhancement. And then most of the roofs that are not coloured green, where there'll be photovoltaics provided, again, they won't be publicly accessible. So the only publicly accessible area for the residents will be the walled garden on the 7th floor over here. And then this slide gives you a flavour of the type of elevations with there's 4 different types of solar shading, and that will help. I mean, these ones here, for example, don't even have a balcony, but they're designed to keep the apartments cool when in a passive way, you know, during the hot days of summer. So I suppose the key messages really are that we think that the size and massing is appropriate for the location. It's higher up to 7 floors at the western end and drops down to respect the lower rise properties to the east. It's highly sustainable with heat pumps, solar panels, green roofs and passive solar shading. And it's a positive regeneration scheme that should breathe some life into a fringe area of the city centre and replace some of the neglected low-rise buildings. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Robin. Again, there are no objectors here, but we do have the applicants. Should members have any questions, I can invite them forward. In the meantime, can I ask members to ask any questions they wish by raising a hand? Kaylee?
Thanks, Chair. I can't find the figures for the housing mix. I know that. No, that's just a table that. Oh. I entirely misread that. Sorry. Okay. Right. So. Okay. So the 3-bed at 13%, would it be possible to make that more?
Robin can start, but I'm quite forward to bring the applicants forward to answer that maybe.
Well, I mean, the table, that table H4 that the policy refers to, I mean, the policy talks about providing an appropriate mix of housing, and the table is a guide for the whole of Leeds. So the 20% minima is really set for the whole of Leeds, and there is a need to take into account the circumstances of the particular properties and sites. My understanding is that a lot of schemes in the city centre achieve around about 10% of 3-bed accommodation. That's quite typical. So 13% is probably slightly better than the average, and we feel it is policy compliant.
If I may, Chair, the minimum is 20%, so I don't understand how it is policy compliant.
Well, the policy simply says that developments need to provide an appropriate mix of housing. So the table is not strictly part of the policy. It's a guide, and what it's providing is what mix of housing the city needs as a whole. So clearly you would expect developments more in the suburbs and more where there's a demand for family housing to have to achieve maybe a lot more than 20% of 3 beds or 3 or more beds. But areas in the city centre and the fringe of the city centre, you perhaps expect less. And as I say, in terms of what the council has been achieving on other sites, it tends to be around about 10%. So this scheme is probably better than most.
Kaylee, do you wish me to bring the applicants forward and to address that question? It's me again.
No, Chair, because this is a matter of policy, so it's not really necessary to bring them forward. Thank you.
Forgot about that. Can we go back to looking at the back of the building, proposed building? I just got to say, I think I found it odd that the present people using that yard were complaining about noise from the flat. My concern is actually, if you build this, how will they cope with noise from that site and overlooking that? So what are we doing to cope with that, basically?
Well, we've sought advice from the environmental health officer on this, because it's introducing a new use into an area where there's already businesses functioning. And what you don't want to happen is that after the development's built and people are living there, they start complaining about the businesses, and then that ends up with the businesses having to close. It's the sort of agent of change principle. So we've had a thorough look at this, and basically noise reports have been provided, and it's considered that with the mechanical ventilation that's being proposed, the residents won't have to open windows during hot periods. There'll be acoustic glazing, and the environmental health office is satisfied that there shouldn't be a problem. There's a suggestion that the inflow for the air source heat pumps should be on the side away from the industrial estate, because there are some I think cooking fumes that come from one of the premises. But again, that's something that we can address through a condition.
I mean, I've got to say, if I can just read down to a little comment on that, I've just got to say, I've no problem with the development, and I wouldn't want them to lose the jobs in the area as well. But I can remember in Councillor Gruin's ward once, they built some houses at the back of a working men's club, and they started complaining about noise on a Saturday night. Well, the thing is, we don't want to lose what's there, but it'd be nice to if the development makes it a lot nicer on the front. But I'm just concerned we're not making a run for the zone back there.
Thank you, David. Councillor Campbell, please.
Do you know, I forgot what the question was. Yeah, come back to me. It'll come.
Thank you, Chair. Just following from Councillor Blackburn, from this morning's site visit, we did notice that the big issue is the parking in the area and also lack of green space on the site. I can understand the site's not big enough, but then there's going to be a contribution towards a green space in the surrounding area. But as a ward member for Bermondsey Richmond Hill, we are getting developments, but lack of green spaces on the sites. That's one, Robin. Why hasn't there been considered any green space on this development? And also, from this morning's site visit, we all witnessed the parking. Have we done any survey? Where is this parking? Where's it coming from? Is it local residents? Is it commuting from people who work in town or city centre?
Just with the green space. I mean, I draw members' attention to paragraph 10.5.1 of my report on green space. I mean, developments we get in all shapes and sizes in all different parts of the city, and some areas are well, everywhere is different in terms of what their green space needs and requirements are. And it's policy G4 of the core strategy, which was fairly recently reviewed from 2019. And that sets out that you can have either green space on site, which is preferred, or if inappropriate, a financial contribution is acceptable. And the way we determine whether green space on site is or isn't appropriate is reference to 6 criteria, and that are set out in paragraph 5.514. And if you look through these criteria, 4 of them are very definitely in favour of taking a contribution. The first one is local deficits, and in this particular area, there's a slight surplus of green space. The third one is distances from existing green spaces have to be within the standards set in policy G3, and there's actually 4 green spaces within those distances in the locality. 2 of them are quite big spaces, so that's satisfied. The 4th criterion is there a lack of other residential development sites that could deliver green space? And I mean, we've already had the sort of situ development that's been able to provide green space just over the canal, and I mean it's an inner city area, as I mentioned in my presentation. It's part of the area opportunity area designated in the Aire Valley Leeds Area Action Plan, there will be other development sites that could deliver green space in the overall area. And the fifth one is that does the development generate a need for play facilities that doesn't exist locally? And I mean, it's not really designed with lots of houses with that would have that kind of need. And then those four, I would say, are definitely tending towards taking a contribution. And the second one is the site sufficiently large, suitably shaped, and reasonably level to accommodate green space? I think this one is arguable. It's certainly not a large site, and the amount of space that you would get if it was, say, 20% of the site, it would be pretty small, and there would be question marks over whether that's really useful or not. So I think the policy definitely steers us towards accepting a commuted sum. And let's not forget that green space in Leeds is not just about the quantity, it's very much about the quality. And but particularly inner city areas, the existing green spaces take a lot of hard wear and tear, and they're always in need of improvement. So you have to really take that into account as well, being able to deliver. And there's just under £50,000 would be part of the contribution, which could be very valuable in the local parks in this area. So that's really why we think in this particular case, it's better to not insist on green space on site, but instead take a contribution. Can I pass over to Lee?
In respect to the question about parking, there haven't been any surveys done, as far as I'm aware, in the parking in the vicinity recently. However, that is something we can do, and you can differentiate between commuter parking and residential, parking by looking at like what parking is on street overnight. So you can get a clear indication of whether that parking is associated with commuter parking or with overnight, local residential parking. However, I think the scale of this development and the amount of parking that's provided, I'm not sure that it would inform us hugely more than what we can see already on the ground. But we have agreed a contribution so that if there is a displacement of car parking as a result, after this development is built, we can then use that to address issues should they arise. And it also, as part of the offset highway works, there will be TROs on street to allow, keep the entrance clear and keep that curb space clear for servicing, delivery, etc. But we can look at if there's if we think that we can also think that appropriate that it's to introduce some time limited waiting, for instance, to support local businesses. We can consider that as well in the round.
Yeah, Chair, just briefly, I want to come back actually. Gillian, how many car park spaces are created on this site? That's one question. And I can tell you now straight away, especially in the evening, Councillor Blackburn did ask me on this morning. It says, Asger, what's the parking like in the evening? And I says, terrible. And God forbid, around if there's an emergency, our emergency workers will not be able to go through. That's how bad parking is down there. So I think, yes, survey definitely needs to be taking place. And can you just clarify for me how many parking spaces will be created on this site?
Yes, so there's 15 car parking spaces provided on site, and that includes one disabled space. So that's 15 car parking spaces for the 38 flats. The policy in the fringe is a maximum of 50% car parking for residential developments.
Thank you, Chair. Forgive my senior moment earlier. I have to be honest, Kerry, it's all your fault because I was thinking about what you were saying about the housing mix and how we consistently talk about the housing mix, and we're consistently told, oh, it's an across the city policy, and yet nobody can tell me if we're meeting it across the city, because I don't think we are. Well, let's face it, we're obviously not. I've got three points, Chair, if we can take them in order. Can we just go back to the elevations you showed us? Is that the best you've got?
I put these together and it's a kind of screen snip type thing, so it may have lost some resolution on the way, I'm afraid.
Well, I am conscious that the one we've just dealt with had some extensive coloured drawings, artist's impression. It brought along a set of materials. And what you're asking me to make a decision on is at best a very faint black and white drawing of what it might look like. And all I've seen is an artist's impression of one end of it, which to me didn't look that spectacular, quite frankly. So I find it really, well, actually, I find it impossible to make a decision based on what you're showing me. So why haven't we got better drawings?
I'm afraid that was all I was able to put together at the time.
Sorry, Chair. There must be a better set of drawings than this. There must be. So I'll look up the table to my good friend who's going to tell me it's an absolutely fantastic design. But Stephen, have we got any better drawings than this?
I'm discreetly trying to. The drawings that were provided are what the officers provided to support the recommendation. I find this very difficult. Please, we think the scheme is supportable in terms of scale and massing, which one can read. But I have to, how can I put it? I fully understand your question. But these are the drawings that the planning service has put up to the panel.
Right. You don't need to say any more on that one.
The drawings are actually to scale, properly drawn, and they give sufficient information for a valid application. That's what we don't produce these drawings. These drawings have been submitted by the applicant. Robin's quite right. It's always very difficult. We lose a bit of resolution because the drawings are on A3 size at most, and we're trying to present them on a big screen here. There is applicants aren't required to submit CGIs or visuals. There is a visual here. I don't know if you can move to that, Robin. Or Lewis. Yes. So there is a visual here. Now, I know it's only a partial visual, but the treatment of the whole building will be grey brick with glazing elements, with balconies, with what's shown here, that change in plane in terms of to allow shadow lines and reveals in terms of the balcony features. And there's that rake of the roof as you step down. Now, that's sufficient information to be able to control the quality of the development. But if members are finding that difficult to understand, I appreciate that. We have a lot of time to look at this. You only have today. But But in terms of meeting the requirements for a valid application, the drawings that were produced by the applicant are acceptable. Thank you.
Did that conclude your questions, Colin? I don't think it did it?
No. Right. There's a contribution of £49,360.85 to green space improvements. Now, you've already said to us that it seems that the planning department's policy is that these sort of money should be spent on improving existing green space rather than providing new, which normally we'd expect on a development site. Where's this money going to be spent?
It's not something that we've finalised at this point in time. We've agreed that the money will be provided, so it's a matter for the council to decide the best way to spend that. It's normally through some consultation with local members.
Can we make sure that's a condition that where the 49,000 is to be spent, it is in consultation with the local members? After all, local members know the ward better than anybody else. Okay, I've still got quite a few. Oh, you haven't quite finished your shopping list. Okay, carry on, Colin.
All right. Just going back to the parking, and I understand what you were saying to us. This actual development, to get in and out, how many parking spaces will it displace to get in and out, as opposed to, and I appreciate it's horrendous around there. Yeah.
Without having the drawing in front of me, I would say probably generally for an entrance, you're losing 2 to 3 parking spaces. The design guide is that you need to, achieve visibility displays, and there should not be marked parking spaces within the visibility displays for any access. However, there's a grey area there where if there's no actual marked parking spaces and there's no TRO to prevent it, then the parking is legal. So there is a small loss of car parking spaces associated with the site access. But I think we'd be looking to take out a few more just to ensure that refuse vehicle can pull in, etc.
Can I just come in there? Just to say that there is an existing vehicle access. So that will be closed up, and another one created a little bit further away from the junction. So that's actually an improvement because it will be safer for the use of the highway. So in a way, there's no net loss, except for what Lisa was saying about improving the standard visibility might mean that there's less spaces because of that. But that in a way is an improvement.
I take it that completes your list, Colin. So can I move on? Thank you. Caroline, please.
Actually, Councillor Blackburn asked the question I was initially going to ask, but I just want to make a few comments. I'm beginning to feel slightly uncomfortable with the process. In my view, policy compliance is a minimum expectation, and I see nothing wrong with exceeding that and being ambitious. Secondly, I would argue, and I hope my colleague on my left as SEAC chair would agree, that green space is always an advantage and should be explored on every occasion, irrespective of policy. And if I may ask a question of another member of the panel, Chair, I'm just wondering, Kayleigh, whether you'd like to explain why you asked about 3 beds and why you indicated that your preference would be for more in a second when I've finished. Okay. Finally, I just wanted to give you an example from a recent course that I attended on planning and design in Bradford. And so there were Bradford councillors there as well. And we were given examples of poor design amongst normal examples, and asked to pick out the ones that were poorly designed and say why. That was one of the exercises. And the councillor sitting next to me, who was from Bradford, said, well, there was a photograph of one in his ward, or his area. And he said, well, I wouldn't know. I could have no idea that it would be built out like this. And I said, well, why not? If it was a plans panel and you had an opportunity to consider it. And he said, we were only given a basic drawing and a plan. I couldn't possibly imagine it was going to look like this when it was built out. And I was proud, because I thought we don't do that in Leeds. In Leeds, we do it properly. So I'm just giving you that comment. We don't want to climb down from that. We actually want to climb up to it. Kaylee, please explain.
Okay.
Please
turn the mic off.
Sorry.
Yeah, if everyone could just look at page 68, because I mean we've just been a while ago, we're sort of going back to what was being said. We've just been told by officers that the figures given, the target figures are sort of, you know, indicative rather than actual. And yet it says type is applicable outside of city centre and town centres. Now type is houses or flats. Size is applicable in all parts of Leeds, and that's number of bedrooms. So regardless of what's gone on before, this would be against policy to pass it.
Okay, do you want to come in, Dad? You've explained it already, but it's me.
I think Robin has explained it in great detail, that the policy actually asks for an appropriate mix. The table is a preferred housing mix table, and that's all it is. It's a preferred housing mix. This is a question about the interpretation of what the policy is. We can only be clear in our advice as officers that the policy asks for an appropriate mix to be provided, taking into account the context of a particular site, and that includes the local characteristics and the nature of the development scheme. The policy does not require a minimum of 20% 3-bedroom units to be provided in every development across the local authority area. So I can't be any clearer than that, but it's for members to decide what weight to give to the mix that's before us.
Thank you. Come back, Kaylee, please.
Thank you. A number of us were at training in which we were told that housing mix is housing mix, and that is policy. So just saying.
Okay, then, as Dalji said, members will make their mind up when we get to it, but we've had the explanations from planning officers. Can we move on then? And Barry, please.
On page 63, paragraph 717, it says this is the summary of the climate and energy officer's recommendations. Now, I don't see any explanation anywhere else whether or not the points that were raised have been satisfied. I've looked in Appendix 1 to see if there's any conditions saying that whenever you bring forward the final information, you know, you need to address those things. So where, from your perspective, are we in terms of addressing the officer's comments?
Sorry, could you just tell me which paragraph number it was again?
717. I'm not saying you haven't complied with them. I'm just asking, where's the proof? That's all I'm asking.
No, well, it's set out a bit further in the section 10. I'll just find so section 10.3.
Yeah, but you go through that, that doesn't talk about these. Yeah.
Well,
These things that are in paragraph 717, sorry. These things that are in paragraph 717 are not addressed in that paragraph there. Other climate emergency initiatives are, so I acknowledge that, and I'm not arguing about that, but you've not referenced the ones in paragraph 717 in there. You've answered another set to clarify about the development.
Well,
you know, so for example, does it talk about the recycling of the materials?
Well, I can come back on that if it's not in the report. The applicants have agreed to recycle what they can, and I think that will include the slates and piles on the houses, and the materials that can't be reused in the development itself will be recycled for use elsewhere, and that will be covered by condition.
Okay, and if I can now do my Councillor Finnegan impression, we've now asked for it for years and years and years about compliance with EN1 and EN2. Have the council now come up with a way of satisfying the plans panels on compliance? Because if this application being the first one since we ever, I mean, ever since I've been on plans panels with Councillor Finnegan, he always asks the same thing. We always get told, oh, this will be satisfied when it comes to completion. Well, we never ever find out whether or not it was or was not compliant. And unless we start as a panel being tougher on the climate emergency side of things, we're never going to get compliance with them. I'm not saying you personally wouldn't ensure it, but have you got any satisfaction? Can you satisfy me that EN1 and EN2 are being complied with?
Well, I mean, we're advised by a climate officer who's now employed by the council who would make those comments, and she is basically satisfied. And I've tried to explain or summarize her views, and I'll try and do that again in words. So effectively, there needs to be satisfaction at different stages of the development. So at the stage we're at now is the design stage, and in terms of the EN1 and EN2 policies, the applicants have provided the evidence to satisfy the requirements of those two policies. So, for example, the SAP evidence has been provided for one dwelling, and that shows that there'll be a better than building regulations saving of carbon dioxide, 20% better. So that's actually been demonstrated by the evidence and material that has been submitted, and it's the same for the other requirements as well, because there's going to be a lot of photovoltaics on the scheme, and that will obviously contribute to the energy balance of the scheme, and that satisfies the EN2 policy, I think. So that's the design stage, but then we have to put conditions on to ensure that when the development is actually built and when more details are available, that we're given the information to show that they've actually built the dwellings in the way they were shown to be designed. And then I think there's a further test in terms of when people occupy the properties. So the officer, the climate change officer, is satisfied, and it's not always easy to get her satisfaction. She digs her heels in and makes sure that the evidence is provided.
Okay, that's fine. And maybe just a paragraph to reaffirm that would stop me asking the question. In other words, you know, these questions, you've decided to put that into the report. Nobody here asked you to put it in. You chose to put that wording in. So then at the bottom, I would have then suggested you should have a paragraph to say, and the climate change officer is now satisfied that those issues have been addressed. And that would be the end of subject. That's all I'm saying. I'm not saying you're wrong in what you've done. So don't take it that way. My final question is, I don't know whether or not this is for the applicant to answer, but what have they done to reflect back the concerns of members when they've consulted with members about the site being used? What did the members raise, and how have they satisfied them? I accept that Councillor Khan is limited as to what he can say because he's got an open mind about whether or not this is or isn't accepted. But he's got two colleagues who can raise issues. What issues were raised? I mean, it may be up to the applicants to answer that question. To be quite honest, to satisfy me that this development has got at least two of the three who can make a public comment are satisfied with the general thrust of this application.
In terms of my involvement, I gave a briefing to the local ward members, but I'm not sure if there had been any previous consultation by the applicant. I don't know if.
I think it's a good point. Can the applicant come forward, please? Welcome for coming forward and for volunteering to answer that question. Can you, you clearly heard Councillor Barry's comments. Does he need to repeat it again? No? No, okay. Is that not what?
Yeah, sure. No, sorry about that. I will say today, actually, we do have the high-rise consultant and the architect. So any further questions on that, on the design, for example, we are more than happy to take those. I mean, all the coloured elevations are on the planning portal, and we've done obviously a design and access statement. So not sure how that's been lost there. So take your point that the black and white ones aren't great. Yeah, sure. Obviously, I've spoken millions of times. For some reason, I'm just having this microphone doesn't like me for some reason, I think. Yeah, sure. No, on this question, yeah, I wrote to the ward members prior to submission. One member came back and made a comment on general amenity to the residents to the rear and also highways. And obviously I fed that back to the project team, and then working with Robin and the relevant consultees, we feel we've more than overcome those.
Did you go back to the elected member to confirm the changes that had been put in to satisfy their issues, or has that not been done? There was the expectation that the elected member would have gone onto the planning file themselves to assess whether or not these changes have been made.
Yeah, sure. No, it's more the email from one of the ward members was more just the general feelings about the scheme. I did offer to go and meet the ward member with the project team, who are also here today, but didn't get a response to that. But following the decision today, I will reach out and give them an update on the scheme. But yeah, no, I mean, consultation isn't an empty ritual. It's very important, and I think, as the chair said, the board members know the site better than anyone else, so yeah, they're vital. So we did give them an opportunity to contribute.
Thank you for that. Probably a good idea if you stay there for a while. There might be one or two more questions. We have a number of members who still want to ask some questions. Katie, it's you next.
Thank you. I'm also interested in paragraph 717, the one that you've discussed with Councillor Anderson's comments. And quite a bit of what I wanted to say has kind of been picked up, but I just wanted to focus in on the recycling element, there are some comments in the draft conditions which run on page 87 and 88. And you did mention that there will be a record of materials used on site and what gets recycled. I just want to know if there are targets for that, because it doesn't necessarily achieve any climate ambitions if we just record things. Is there a minimum standard of recycling? So that's my first question. The second one was about the car parking spaces. Do they all have to have EV chargers or just some of them? I think it's all, but I just wanted to be sure. The next one was just to echo Councillor Gruen's comments on green space. I appreciate it's a difficult site to achieve, but we really should be ambitious about making opportunities for green space. Then I had one about access to the garden. Will that be accessible to all residents or just a certain number of them that are close by? And then my final one was, can you go back to slide 40 on the presentation, the one that showed some the picture I think it had. Yeah, that one. Some clarification about the top corner. Is that planting? Is that going to be planted up with those kind of things? Yeah, or a little bit of clarification about is that what it will actually look like? Thank you.
Robin, most of them you can kick off and answer them, but we can bring the applicants in if necessary.
Whether there's policy on the minimum sort of standard quantities of recycling is a good question, because I don't think there are any set standards. I think this is our climate sustainability officer pushing the boat out a bit more. So it's actually beginning to raise that question. Can we have some of the, old fabric of the building reused and recycled? We hadn't really pressed for that previously. So probably the next step would be to maybe develop some kind of standards for quantification or something. That might be something more for our policy colleagues in the future. But I think currently we would just try and seek to maximize as much as possible. But some things are going to be more recyclable than others. And I think it's possible the applicant might be able to say a bit more on this. But the answer to the question is we don't have any policy standard about quantities or amount. EV chargers, I'll need Lisa to come back on. My understanding is that the walled garden on the 7th floor will be accessible to all residents, and I mean this is a kind of impression of how it would look from the outside. I was actually sent an impression of what it would look like from the inside by the applicant a couple of days ago, but it's too late to go into our slideshow, which we have to do about 10 days before or something. But it's partly going to be covered by condition. You can see, if I just go back to Lewis, I'm not sure if this one. So you can see there that's the basic shape of the garden, but conditions will control exactly what planting and exactly what it's like, because that'll be a detail that we'll come on to. So Lisa, on EV.
Yeah, policy EN8 requires all parking spaces for residential to be EV.
Okay, Does the applicants want to make any comments on those questions?
Hello, yeah, I'm Ian Collins from Mesh Architects. I think it'd be quite helpful if I could just have a couple of minutes just to clarify a few little bits and pieces there. We have got some visuals which were in the planning design statement. So if you haven't seen that, we can show you them here on my laptop if you want to have a look. Just a couple of quick things on climate and sustainability. I think it's worth just emphasising a couple of things that Robin hasn't really quite covered. That right from the start on this scheme, the brief we had from the client was to make this scheme zero carbon. And we've designed the whole thing from the very start, taking into account orientation, passive design principles, solar shading, in order to reduce the amount of energy that's used to cool the building. So the whole thing has been designed to be over insulated. So the insulation levels are way beyond building regulations levels. And we've used passive house design principles from the start to design the building. So it's orientated to face towards where the best view is and also where the sunshine is, so that 90% of the flats have a view overlooking the city over a distant view over the city, and are facing so they can get some sunshine. So in the winter sun comes in and warms the flat, so it reduces the energy burden. And then in the summer, you have the shading, which allows it to stop it overheating, so you don't have to cool it. They're very simple passive house design energy principles. They're not really applied to blocks of flats very often. So we feel like, and our client feels like they're being quite groundbreaking here by actually not only using photovoltaics and air source heat pumps, which is, you know, a fairly common way of dealing with these things, but we've also over insulated, which is a lot more expensive way of building. We've separated the balconies out so that they don't cause any thermal bridging on the building. So all the principles of the design are really based around getting people the best views, lots of sunlight. It's about well-being as well as climate control. So they're all designed so that the people using the building have the best experience possible. They've all got either a balcony or an external space they can use of their own. The screens that are used for the solar shading are designed to be movable so that you can control that. So you can control your views, you can control privacy, and you can control the amount of sunshine you're getting onto your balcony. And then the roof garden is designed, it's quite large actually, and it's not an afterthought. It was part of the design from the very start. And what you're seeing on that image that you had up there was the greenery poking through a load of perforated brickwork, which is to allow the garden to breathe at the top, so that the planting works. And it's aimed at trying to get as much biodiversity as possible up there. So the idea is there will be insects pollinating those areas, using pollinators to attract insects to those areas. So it's not just a kind of leftover bit of space on the top with some grass on it. It's meant to be an inherent part of the whole message behind the building. So I hope that was helpful. I just wanted to get across some of the principles that have been brought into account right from the start. Thank you.
Thank you. Can I ask, while you're there on landscaping, is there any opportunities to get more greening, street trees or planting around the car park or somewhere? I know the car park will be substantially in the shade, but there are shade-loving plants. I just wonder, because it seems a concern to members that there is not much landscaping on the site.
As you'll appreciate, the building takes up quite a large part of the site because it's quite a long, narrow site, which is quite difficult to use, particularly with the amount of parking we've been asked to provide. That always takes up a large amount of the space. So we've got a variety of green roof areas, which are wherever there's a flat roof that we're not covering in photovoltaics, they will be green roofs in their truest sense. So they will have planting on them. On the street side, I mean, it's a bit trickier All I would say is that in conversation with the design officer, because we've had a lot of conversations with them, with them and Robin, we've made the frontage really active. So there is office space in there, and the office space will be used by the developer of the project as well, because they feel really proud of this and want to own it and want to be there. And so there's opportunities in their front window frontages for lots of planting. I know they're keen on the whole feel of the building being like that. But there's also the whole of that facade, which was on the black and white elevation, is balconies, but they're not just bolt-on balconies like you see everywhere in Leeds. They're proper depth. There's lots of planting provision in those, and we're hoping that people will take ownership of those and will produce a really green facade that is also changing every day with the sunshine. So that's all part of the plan.
Thank you for those comments. I still have a few more people. Peter.
Thank you, Chair. A couple of things, really. I think they're probably all questions to the officer. In terms of the cycle parking, it notes there slightly fewer than we would normally accept, but that's fine. But it notes that they're Sheffield stands. I just want to check whether they are somewhere secure and that they're off street and behind some secure gating of some kind. In terms of the surrounding road network, it's obviously on, as you noted, the fringe of where the city centre's got to. A lot of the area up into a few hundred yards of this has been treated to make it better for walking and cycling, but this would be out on the edge. I wondered what plans there are to bring this more into a more attractive streetscape, because I think the journey on a bike especially would feature going across quite large junctions to get where you need to go. There are two specifics. I do want to come back on this 3-bed issue around the policy, and I see what we have now as the answer is that we have a table that is guideline only, and obviously we have a policy that says these are the targets, but if you can let us know that this area has a different characteristic, then that is acceptable in policy standards. So the policy at the moment allows things to go away from that table. So I understand that completely. Difficulty as I see this from both sides. One, in the city centre being on city plans, seeing a majority of 1-bedroom apartments. In my own ward then, on the outer edges of the city, seeing a majority of 4- and 5-bedroom executive homes. And I'm trying my best to get 1-bedroom apartments there, which I know are in fact the most needed on the council houses waiting list, especially. So in a question in terms of this one, I guess, have the applicants supplied details to say that this area is different and therefore an assessment that they've made? Or have we made a decision, I guess, as have officers made a decision that in this area, the arrangements that they've come to for the housing mix are acceptable, and that's what is acceptable in the city centre? Because I think that's a bit different in terms of what evidence has been provided. I guess the other one is more of a development plans panel question, but I'll ask it here. We obviously are going out for a new housing market assessment at the moment. And this is a policy that we've all had difficulties with. I understand what the current policy is. That's absolutely fine. Can anyone give me a guarantee that when we've gone through the next market assessment, we will have housing mix requirements identified for different areas of the city that both are specific to those areas, so different for city centre, fringe, maybe a couple of levels out to the suburbs, but also will help us in our policy of diversifying the accommodation and the populations that can live in those areas. So getting more families into the city centre, but in terms of my outer wards, for instance, getting more the smaller apartments. So a couple of specifics on the development there, and then I guess some general ones that I'm not wishing for us to continue having this conversation, especially after we have a new local plan in place.
Thank you, Peter. I'm going to bring in Mr. Feeney on that one.
Thank you, Chair. Just on the SHMA, just to give you the reassurance that the technical work has actually now been completed. So we've passed the commissioning stage. And the next step is to arrange a members' workshop session in the new year. I know Martin Elliott is actively on with making the plans for that. So in terms of the outputs of the SHMA, not just on mix but on other matters as well, that's something where there'll be the opportunity to discuss in detail some of the parameters that you've described for us this afternoon in that session, and then that will enable us then to inform policy as part of the 2040 plan. So we're at that point now in the process. So it is very timely that you've raised that issue, because we can pick it up through that workshop session. Thank you.
There was questions on bicycle storage.
Yes, so the cycle parking is internal and secure, and we will also, the details will be secured by condition as well. In terms of the cycle network, you know, as you're probably aware that, you know, there is a route going out on East Street, but yes, you're right, there's a limit to where that goes to. But there is a piece of work in progress developing the LC WIP, which is cycling and walking infrastructure plan, trying to look at where gaps, where other elements of cycle infrastructure and walking infrastructure need to be improved. So that is part of an ongoing process at the moment. So no, we're not seeking any infrastructure improvements like that associated with this development, but there is a piece of work ongoing to look at improvements across the city.
You did that complete your list? Please come back.
Thank you. We'll see. Thank you, David. Yeah, that workshop will be useful. I think we just need to get a handle on this, don't we, and get a firm policy that allows members the aspirations that they have of seeing a diverse mix of people living in all communities. In terms of then the cycle network, I think that's really useful. I'm just thinking of the comments that Active Travel England made on the previous one around seeking a contribution towards whatever may be coming. Obviously, there will be some additional trips made here. This is a much smaller development than the previous one. However, it will have an impact adding up to that next area of the city. If we see 10 more developments come through this size and we haven't had a contribution, we're going to see quite a sizable amount. So I wondered if there was any contribution there towards, obviously, the network that the desire as you laid out, Lisa.
No, we haven't sought a contribution on this development. I think it's if we had a scheme sort of ready, you know, it'd be easier to seek a contribution, but the scale of this development also makes it harder to justify a contribution. But as the LC WIP has developed, it will make it easier for us to then agree contributions going forward for future developments.
Thank you, Lisa. Thank you, Peter. Dan, I think you're the last one. No? Okay. Can we go on to comments? Okay. Comments? No comments. I know comments has been sneaking in. I'll bring in Councillor first, and then I'll bring you in. Caroline, did you want to comment?
As no one was speaking, I was just going to offer to kick us off. From what I've seen of the very small amount of design that's been shared with us, I do think it's a nice design, but I can't comment in general because we've only seen one aspect of the building. But it does seem to me as if it's an example of good contemporary design, which I'm always pleased to see.
Councillor Carlisle?
Thank you, Chair. It's interesting seeing this one come to this panel because there's a similar application in my ward for 34 or 36 apartments, can't remember which. Now in my ward, that's the most detailed application we've seen for probably the largest block of flats that we've had. So obviously that's a quite substantial report that goes into a lot of the detail. It looks a little bit, I must say, like this coming to city plans. This is a small development that we haven't really thought as much of that detail. And that contrast goes there because obviously the one that's in my ward, I've seen intricate CGIs of somebody telling me why a 6th floor building there will suit in what is a residential area because there's a lot they have to prove. But I think in this, we haven't necessarily got all that detail. And I think that's a shame, really, because I think more it's around the absence of the detail than the quality of the development that I'm struggling with. We're used to probably seeing a lot more than that, given the fact, I guess, one excuse could be that on larger developments, there's deeper pockets to put more work in. But I'm just a bit concerned we maybe haven't asked for as much detail as members would have liked on this occasion.
Okay, I'm sure Jonathan and Dalgid has taken note of that. We could have done with more detail, and maybe we could have done with having the climate officer here to it. As it said, it's all there, but it's not in the report. I'm going to bring the gentleman at the back in because there is another member, and I don't want to give the applicants the last word. Sorry.
Yeah, it's just really interesting comments there from Councillor Carlisle. I had the first pre-app on this site in 2017. You know, we have thrown the kitchen sink at this. We've left no stone unturned. So apologies that hasn't come through today. On the housing mix, we've not really deviated from our position there. And I had the very arduous task of looking at some of the major applications in recent years, including Echo, and the average is 11% for the 3 beds. So when Robin says it's an improvement, that is correct. And then I just wanted to come back up to Councillor Blackburn's point about the noise. To the rear, there is the industrial unit, and after 4 p.m, that is a ghost town. Envision are situated there. They've been there for 4 or 5 years, and we've got a robust noise report to capture all that, which has been accepted by the EHO. So yeah, I think you probably sense maybe a frustration in my voice because we really have worked closely with the design officer here, had several pre-apps and paid good money for that, and it's been useful. But I think I've maybe underwhelmed by some of the comments really because we have done the work. That's all I'll say.
Thank you, Dan. I saw your hand, I believe.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Before I say it, I'd always understood that once we get to the comments part of the meeting, respectfully, that's members' comments rather than anybody else's comments. I was somewhat disappointed that the applicant was brought in again. In fact, candidly, I think that was probably the least helpful interjection from an applicant I've heard for some time. Probably best you'd have kept your counsel, in my humble opinion. What's before us is before us. Officers have assured us there is sufficient detail to make a decision. I share colleagues' views that it would have been helpful to have had more. Nonetheless, it is a fairly modest application in the scheme of things. I think it's basically sound and solid. I share Councillor Grewin's view, and therefore I'd move to approve, Chair.
I suppose I did hear some slight frustration from the developer there, but I have to say, I have to feel confident that what I've been shown and what's in the report will create a development which we can support. And at the moment, I'm not there on that. Now, that's not to say I couldn't be there. And I pick up from Caroline's point. We see a corner of a development which looks okay, but not the rest of it, or not the rest in a form that we can understand. And it really is pointless bringing things to plans panel that don't contain the detailing that in the end, plans panels will ask for, because we do this every time. So, there's a stock list. I can go along here and I can tell you exactly what you do. You'll talk about design. Kaylee will talk about housing mix. I'll talk about green space. We know what's coming. So we need to answer those questions. At the moment, I can't put my hand up for this one because my views on green space, but that could have been outweighed by a fantastic design. I can't see that. Now, I could be persuaded if I could see that, but at the moment, I can't do that. I hate to say this, but I'd be more tempted, if possible, for us to put this off for a cycle, and only a cycle, so that members can be better appraised on what appears to be, from the odd interjection from the developer, a design which they worked on in some detail and meets some of the design criteria that we want. And it will allow officers to pick up one or two of the other points. So, sorry, Dan, can I amend Councillor Cohen's proposal that we defer this, making a decision on this for one cycle only, at which members will be provided with more information and a presentation by the developers, including a presentation of materials around the details of design and the rationale behind us, in effect, setting aside certain elements of of our policy, with a view to, well, with a view from my point of view, to being able to make a clear decision on what we're doing. And that's not to say that, and I'll make this very clear, I think the principle, none of us have a problem with. But we can't, I really have put my hands, I just cannot understand the detail. And if I can't visualize that, having done this for, 40 years now, then there must be something wrong. So I'll propose that, Chair, as an amendment.
Well, it would be a separate one, actually. Go back to Dan. Did you want to come in? I haven't got a second for either of these at the moment, but I will ask when appropriate. Dan.
Yeah, great with respect to Colin, who generally abstains anyway, so rarely puts his hand up, as we saw last time. So no, I would still leave mine as it is. I hope somebody might feel to second, because for me, it's going to come back. Nothing's going to change. We've got enough detail to take something forward, and we should be.
I'm happy to second Councillor Cohen, because the explanation I got and my questions about the climate change have satisfied me. I have no reason to doubt that that information is available. But if Robin tells me it's there, I have no reason to doubt what Robin's telling me, to be quite frank. So I am satisfied that even if we did delay it, we're not going to get any more information other than seeing pictures. In my mind, I'll still be able to have the same view with the additional information. So I'm happy to support Councillor Cohen.
All right, Councillor Khan.
I'm on the process.
Sorry, I'm on the process now and looking for seconders for Councillor Campbell. We can decide what we want to do when it comes to the vote.
Thank you, Chair. Just before, I'd like to say that I like to declare that I came with open-minded, this afternoon, and after hearing, then I will make my mind up as well. Just to follow on Councillor Campbell, actually, yes, this application do sit in my ward. Normally, the application, when developers come, they do build there, but in principle, I'm in favour of this development. But however, there are lack of information for me for this afternoon to make that final decision. So I like to officially second Councillor Campbell's motion, Chair, with some more information coming.
Thank you for the Councillor Councillor Khan. Amy, our legal. I'm going to take the resolutions as they come to me, and obviously it was Councillor Cohen and Councillor Barry who moved that we accept the recommendation, and then we'll see what the vote is, and I'll take the second one. Is that okay? Okay. Always get legal guidance. Okay, then. Can I call for a vote in favour of Councillor Cohen's recommendation, please? All those show. 4, 5. I think 4, 5. Okay, those against. 1, 2, 3, 4. It is 5, isn't it? Oh my God. Okay. Was it? I didn't see your hand. Can you show again, please? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay, so that is lost. So moving on to Councillor Campbell's resolution to defer for one cycle to get the information that is missing from the report, but has been satisfied to a lot of members' satisfaction by the applicants and the case officer. All those in favour of that resolution, please show. 1, 2, 3, 4, 6. 6 again. Those against? Okay, that's clearly carried. 2 against. Have you got those numbers, Andy? Lovely. Okay. So you've heard the debate, the applicants. It's been a very lively and very interesting debate. I think in general, most members are in favour of it, but there are questions that remain outstanding, and I'm sure they will be satisfied when it comes back again. It's one cycle delay, I'm afraid, but thank you for answering the questions frankly and honestly, and thank you members for engaging in such a lively debate. This is what planning is all about, isn't it wonderful? Can I say that I have got to leave the chair now? I have a serious issue in my ward, and I'm meeting with highway officers in Merrion House, and I'm going to invite Councillor Groon to take the chair. Do I have agreement on that panel? Okay, thank you. And this is our Christmas meeting. Merry Christmas to all of you. I shall bring the mince pies in January. I am not bringing them in November, sorry. And I will not break that tradition.